So in this video I'm going to paint a landscape out of my imagination or out of my head, and I'm not going to use a source. It's just completely out of my head, and I thought I would just I've done this once before, but this is a chance for me to sort of just paint without following the exact method that I use to teach people. And what I mean is, this is not how I would recommend that you start painting. So if you want to learn how to paint, I would go watch my video at drawmixpaint.com about how to paint in oil, how to draw in proportion, and how to mix colors. And this video has got a lot of helpful tips, and I'm sure that there's going to be things that you find helpful in here. But basically, this is me painting out of my imagination and just talking about the process. So when I started off on this little landscape, I guess I had decided that I was going to basically have a dramatic sky of some kind, not necessarily a sunset, but just to basically a sky that's quite a bit brighter than the foreground. And so I'm always thinking about these things logically, and so I know that if my sky is going to be sort of mid-tone and brighter, a lot brighter, then my foreground has got to be at least on the dark side. So every color that I put in this foreground, like the colors that I'm putting in here, this gray that I've mixed up, these are all darkish colors. They're not anywhere near they don't have a lot of white or yellow in them. And furthermore, I'm thinking also about the color of the sky, and I know my sky is going to be a combination of colors. I'm probably going to do a yellow. I mean, I know now because I've already painted it, but at the time I was thinking sort of a dirty yellow with a strong purple, or vice versa. And what I ended up doing was the strong yellow with the sort of dirtyish purple. But that means if your sky is yellow and purple, those are opposite colors, and so that's going to make a very neutral colored light. And that's why I'm painting everything in these grays, and I'm not actually painting green. And that's just a logic thing. If I painted it green, then that means it's getting white light or something that's pulling that green out. And if you take green grass or a green landscape and you add a really neutral light to it, especially one with a lot of purple in it or whatever, then it's gonna take all that green right out. Now as I come closer, I get a little richer, a little darker. I'm also thinking about what are my darkest darks in this landscape. So in other words, if you look here in the foreground, you see that I'm painting almost black, and it's not black, it's still gray, but it's just one step from black. And the reason I'm doing that is because there's just very little air that you're looking through. If you're sitting there looking at this scene, and this foreground is, I don't know how many feet from you, but there's not a lot of mist or air or whatever it is in the air that's causing it to all the blacks to turn milky. And so then if you look off in the distance, you will never see a black because all that dirty air, or it may not be dirty, it could just be fog or whatever, but there's always something in the air, even if it's really clean. And so the further it looks off into the distance, the more milky it gets. So I decided to put a tree in this landscape, and I kind of had that idea in the beginning and was maybe thinking about a windswept tree, but then I decided that was a little too cliche, and just decided to do a tree. And so I'm just putting in the stump. I'm not going to paint the upper part of the tree because I want to paint the sky and get that basically figured out before I paint a tree on top of it, because trying to paint a sky around a big dark tree is really difficult. It's a lot easier just to paint it solid and then just wipe out the area where you want to put the tree, and that's what I ended up doing. So this is getting a little more green. I'm trying to sort of decide exactly how light I want the foreground to be, and off in the distance this would sort of be the the lighter colors, a field off in the distance being lit by the sky or whatever. And so it's a little more green, and that's because right along the horizon, the light is going to be a little bit more orange, like sunsets typically are. And it's not a sunset, but at least the sun's, I guess it is a sunset, but hopefully it's not a postcard sunset. And so I just kind of going for it. And a lot of times when I'm painting like this, I really don't feel like I know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of guessing, and I'll give it my best guess, and then I'll put it on the canvas and decide whether I like it or not. And that's when you really got to watch out for the optical illusions, because you really can't judge color until you have the darker colors next to it. And that's why I put a little bit of that of the ground off in the distance, so that I'd have something to look at the sky against. Because if I just painted that light color right on the canvas, it wouldn't give me anything to relate it to. I could have painted the sky first and then tried to paint the ground. That would have been fine, but that's just the way I did it. But now that I have the foreground, or rather not the foreground, but the land off in the distance on the horizon, once I have that put in, then I can put a little bit of sky against it and decide if I like the direction it's going. But a lot of this is just me using my logic, because I really don't know. It's not as if I look at the color and say, ooh, I like that. It's more like I'm thinking, well, if the sky should be orange, how orange do I want it to be? Okay, and now I've decided it needs to be a little stronger than I put it. But I'm sort of approaching it in steps and just putting something up there and then deciding which way I want to push it. And that, in the end, gives you some nice colors. I mean, as you can see, just the difference in those two, the stronger orange and then the first orange I put in, those work nicely together. And that's just because I started off essentially painting in the wrong color, or one that I decided that needed to be more orange. So here are the orange bits of the sky, and it's going to get more orange as it approaches the horizon. That's something you see whenever you see, not when, it's not always true, but in general, if you look at a sunset or even the sunrise, you get a lot more color right on the horizon. And then if you look up above you, it tends to be more like a blue sky, or not to have nearly as much orange in it. So these are the dark clouds. And I'm putting this color in, and I don't like it at all, really. I feel like it's too gray, or maybe not gray, but whatever. But I'm just going to go with it, because I know that once I get it all put in, I can look at it and decide that I want to push it one way or another. And that's what I'm doing right now. A little more purple to contrast the yellow parts of the sky. And I think that at the time that I did that, I know that the rest of my sky is going to be toward the top. I'm going to do a dirty purple sky to contrast that lower orange or yellowy part. And that's to have, my most favorite sort of color that I like together is when you have a strong color with a dirty complement. So this is the dirty purple. May not look that dirty, but I'll probably make it more dirty as I go. And now here comes the blue sky, which is way too strong, and I've made it slightly purple. But again, I know that I can put this in way too strong and then tone it down very easily. So that's what I'm doing. And you get a nicer, more interesting colors when you do it that way, than as opposed to just mixing the sky color. So now that's up in the top bit, and now in the middle part of the sky, obviously there's going to be a blend of the yellow and the purple. So I'm taking that purple and I'm just putting in a little bit of that yellow, which is basically making the purple not as strong. Just simple logic. There was nothing about this that I thought, oh, this feels good or this looks good. It was me saying, okay, the top part's going to be purple, and it has to finally get down to being a mix of the orange, so I better put a little bit of more orangey color and tone down the purple toward the bottom as I approach the middle part. And now I'm adding more orange and getting it closer and closer to the lower part, and this is going to go in the middle. And then hopefully it'll look like sort of a nice transition from that strong orange down in the bottom to the purpley color up in the top with some dark clouds, going across it. So basic, and it's definitely too purple right now, but that was knowing that I could tone it down. So, which is what I'm doing now. I'm kind of trying to bring it all together a little better. That color scheme that I learned that from Sargent, or at least I observed it in his paintings over and over again, John Singer Sargent, and it's something where it's simply you take a strong color and then you put a dirty complement in the painting with it. And that can be, in this case, you sort of have the orangey sky and then the blue at the top, and those are complements. Or you could, it's going to get more yellow as I go on the bottom part, and then the top part will be the dirty purple. So it'll be strong yellow with dirty purple. And it's not that right now. It's a little bit more orangey and a little bit more bluey at the top probably. But anyway, that's kind of where I'm taking it. And now some of that, when you have that orange light on the horizon like that, it's going to light up things. And so I'm going to bring some of that orange color into the land, especially off into the distance. And then as it approaches me, as the land approaches me, it approaches the viewer, it's going to become more gray and more, influenced by that purple sky, which is over the head of the viewer, if you can imagine. So I'm just thinking all that through and just thinking about what color would the foreground be, what color would the sky be if such and such was, if the sky was purple over it, or whatever it is. There's a lot of times when I liked the way these clouds looked, and I feel like I probably could have left them the way they were. But one thing I've learned about painting as I've done these videos of myself, and I think this is only the second one I've done of where I paint out of my head. But I noticed that I'll stop and when I'm editing the video, and I'll think, my gosh, I should have left the sky just like it was. And I just didn't even notice it. And even in the foreground, I painted some really nice features in the foreground, and I just wiped them off. And it was just because, the artist's curse or whatever, but I was looking at my work, or I just didn't take the time to notice it. And so one of the things I'm going to do in the future when I paint these landscapes is I'm going to try to be a little more aware of what's going on, and take the time to sit back in my chair and decide if I've got something or not, because it's just too many things, and a lot of times you end up working it so much harder than you need to, when it was just fine. For instance, that little bit on the sky is, I don't know if I ever made it any better than that, but I sure did spend a lot of time working, probably overworking it. So I'm always questioning, how far to take things and whether to leave things alone or whatever it is. So now I'm just trying to bring that purple down into the lower parts. And as you can tell, I'm sort of, I keep using a horizontal stroke because it's, skies sort of come down in layers and they're horizontal layers. So that's why I kind of keep my strokes, left to right. And don't mind if there's a little bit of some areas where it doesn't mix into this perfect smooth blend, because a little bit of layered, color is nice in the sky. And I like to use scrapers a lot when I paint these landscapes out of my head. Um, that was intentional. When I put that heavy blue down, I knew that I was going to scrape it all off because I really don't like to get my paint too thick on the canvas. It becomes really hard to work with. And so if it ever starts getting really thick and built up where I've got, blobs of paint sticking out or whatever, trying to work into that is really difficult. So I always bring my scraper out. And not only the scraper, but sometimes I'll even take a paper towel and just wipe it all off. You still have some paint left in the canvas, but it's just a great way to sort of get rid of 90% of it. It's hard to tell, but when I look at the sky as it is now, I might like it more than it was at the end of the painting after I'd overworked it so much. But everybody would have their own opinion about that, and so you guys can decide later, if you like the finished sky or as it is at whatever point. Sometimes the worst thing you can do to a painting like this is wake up and be in a down mood or whatever, or just don't have it. Some days you can paint, some days you can't, and you'll wake up and you might have a beautiful painting that's working really nice, and you'll go in there and just destroy it because you don't have an eye and you don't like anything, and you're trying to make it look good, and you'll never be happy, and et cetera, et cetera. So a big part of being an artist, and this goes for, I've especially learned this teaching my students, is that you have to be able to not be overly judgmental of your own work. It's something that's whether you have to sleep on it, which is a big thing, which helps a lot. So just trying to get the final details off in the distance and just try to get the rest of this foreground put in. And it's not until you get all of the canvas covered that you're really able to make a judgment about whether your values are working or whatever. And so it's always nice to at least get the whole canvas covered. And painting, one of the reasons I like to paint on a stained canvas is because you can imagine if this was a white canvas, it would even be much harder to make a judgment about these values. I can put these colors in there and get a much better idea of how they're going to look eventually than if you're painting on a white canvas, which is just like trying to paint on top of a light bulb or something. It's just way too bright. There are other reasons too to paint on a stained canvas like that, but one being you get better coverage with your darks. If you try to paint black on top of a white canvas, it's a lot harder to get full coverage. So this is the shadow of the eventual tree that I'm going to paint, and I decided, okay, the sky overhead is going to be bluish, and so therefore this part of the ground is not going to get any of that orange light, which would kill the blue. It's going to be only the blue sky. And I went overboard and I kind of made it really blue, and now I'm putting a little bit of green into it because it was just too blue. But basically it's that bluish, slightly purplish color in the shadow, because the shadow of the tree would be completely blocked, or will completely block, or rather the tree will completely block the orange light off in the distance, and the only light that's going to be illuminating that part of the ground is going to be the blue sky overhead. But it does need to be dark, and so that's why I'm going back in and making sure, especially here in the foreground, that somewhere in there I've got my blacks, and that means that if there's a bush or a tree or whatever it is, somewhere in the nooks and crannies of the bush or deep in the branches amongst the leaves, you're going to find little areas that are completely in shadow and therefore completely black. up in the foreground. And that's why I always, even if I scrape it off like I'm doing here, I'm going to go back and you'll see that I re-put those darks back in. Although those are pretty dark, and those would probably be fine. But I tend to milk them up as I go, and then when I'm done, I always go back and make sure that I've got my crispy dark blacks up in the foreground, even if it's just a little bit. Now, if you were painting just a big flat field, then there may not be any blacks, but this ground's got a lot of texture and a lot of dimension to it. This painting took me in total of 4.5 hours to paint. Well, it was really more like about 4 hours and 10 minutes because I left the camera running a few times when I wasn't painting. But when I'm painting, there's a lot of wiping my brush out or sitting there and contemplating what I'm doing and looking at it, or taking a break. That was over a couple days that I worked on this one. I think it was a couple days, might have been more, but 3 days at the most. But it was just a little bit every day, and that's how I tend to do these. I'm always busy and have a million things to do, but when I can sit down and work on these, even, I'm good for maybe an hour, and then I need a break because I start thinking too hard and I lose all my objectivity and I start hating everything I'm doing. Now that if I'm really into it and really enjoying myself, that'll be different. But now this is a lake or some water that I put in, and somebody was looking at the painting and said they thought they saw water, and so I thought, well, I looked at it and I didn't see water, but I decided that I did maybe could make the foreground look like a little pond or something. And eventually I'm going to take all that water out. I decided I didn't like it, and I think that was probably a good idea. So here I am, I'm putting in the upper part of the tree, and I'm just putting in some color, knowing that when I wipe it off, it's going to be more effective if it's already been toned down a little bit. And that took a while to make sure I wiped that off properly. I just cut out most of it. So now just putting in the darks again, and I'm going to always start with my darks. So this part of the tree, I can just paint it black, and if I need to put in the lighter colors, I can do that. And this is a little heavy on the brown, and that's because I know that when I paint that dark blackish color into that milky color, it's going to turn gray and blue, and so I make it kind of heavy burn umber to counteract the milkiness of it, if that makes any sense. Even here, if you'll notice, my black's a pretty warm black. It's kind of heavy with burn umber, and that's okay because there's some warm light in the sky anyway. See, I actually like the shape right as it is right then, and I think I like that shape even more than the way it ended up, but that's the way it goes. I didn't take the time to decide it was good enough. It's one of the things, sometimes when you do something and it just hits the first time, you just you never believe it, and you just assume that you've got to work something, and if you just take the time to look at it. Always a little bit of a soft edge on a tree. It's never just a black crispy edge. It's got to have a little something to it as the light passes through, or whatever it is. Now this is some orange light, and I'm imagining that there's this light from the distance, which is going to be brighter in a minute when I lighten it up. And that orange light is sort of catching the silhouette of the tree. You can imagine it's just a simple thing, and that's just me saying, yeah, if there was an orange sky off in the distance, then the leaves would be reflecting some of that on the edges. So I'm doing it way too strong, knowing that I'm going to tone it way down, and play with it. Now these are some, this is some leaf texture in the shadow part, and again this is purple just like the ground, because this side of the tree is not going to be illuminated at all by the orange light coming from the horizon. It's going to only be coming from the blue purpley sky overhead. And so I took liberties and kind of made it a really strong purple and then kind of toned it down a little bit. And then I decided I didn't like it and scraped the whole thing off. But, you know, I think it turned out all right. I still have the edges, but it didn't look half bad, but at the time I must have really not liked it. But I really do like to use a scraper, especially when I'm doing these landscapes. Trying to get a little light coming through some of the edges of the tree where the light, you know, might pass through. It's always a trade-off between being really daring and not being happy, and, you know, continuing, or whether you're gonna, you know, ruin what you've done by working on it too much. But in the end, I think the tree turned out okay, and probably had a lot more interesting color in it than it would have if I would have left it. But I really did like the way it looked when I just didn't work on it so much. But maybe you'll disagree. Just trying to get a little bit more lighter bits in the shadow. Don't want the tree to be just a black silhouette. But you do have to be careful because this is the dark side and there is some skylight above it. But if you make it too bright, it takes away from the glow of the horizon. So working on this pond, trying to make it look right, and trying to create a shoreline that looks halfway realistic, which I never really achieved. Now I'm using the tip of my brush to just put some scratch marks in the painting, and that's you know, just a little scribble. It sort of adds some texture to it, makes you think you're seeing a little bit of sharp detail. And I tend to do too much when I do it. I mean, this is probably too much, but then I take it out. But by still having a little bit of that coming through, it helps with the texture, and especially in the foreground where you expect to see more, to see texture and everything else. So now I'm going to lighten the sky up a bit. This was just something I think I had in mind the entire time I was painting it, that in the end I would come in and put a nice little glow on the horizon, a little bit that's nice and bright. You don't want to go overboard. You can always just paint it white, but you lose your color if you do that. So it's pretty heavy on the yellow. I very rarely paint with white. In fact, I mean, I can't even think of, maybe the only time I do is if I'm doing like a still life and I'm painting something under 5000K white light or something, but I always want to put a little bit of color in my whites. So just trying to get that edge to look right. Trying to maintain little teeny bits of black here and there. It's so easy to go in and just, you know, milk the whole thing up, but you got to be careful because you want to have those darks in there in the mix. You can always put them in at the end, but it just looks better if you can just get it the first time usually. So a little bit of shine on the edge of the bark, and that again is just catching the reflection off of the distant yellow light that's coming through. Just a hint. Subtlety is key. You know, that goes for painting still lifes or portraits or anything. But, you know, what I've found that amateurs do is they tend to exaggerate everything. And things only need to be subtle. You know, for instance, the little bright bits that I put in there are too strong, so I'm going to take them out. It's maintaining the subtlety of it all. It's real easy to overpaint things. So I'm trying to get a nice little interesting bit of shoreline with some vegetation and things growing along the edge and some rocks and etc. And looks okay right now. I actually thought, well, that's kind of working. And then for whatever reason I decided, oh, I don't like that water and I'm going to take it all out. So never mind all that nice pretty texture that I put in. Start all over again. So now some bushes, because some people don't like lonely trees, and I like lonely trees, but I thought maybe it needed more. And so I decided to add 4 bushes just to see if it would work. It was just a little bit too much lone tree on landscape, you know. So now there's 5 friends. You'll notice I'm always painting the darks first. Maybe not always, but almost always. Now trying to get some of that blue in the shadows like I put in the trees so that matches. So I just started doing the same process, kind of started with it too strong and then come back in and put some dirt into it later. Put a little bit of reflection on the edge of the bushes. You notice I'm trying to keep little bits of black mixed into my texture. So basically you have the colors put in, and now I'm just going to play with it. I mean, this is really the most fun part, when you sort of feel like you've got it. And I wasn't real happy with the painting at this point, but I thought it was at least worth trying to finish and see if I could make something out of it. And I'm glad I did. But it's a lot more fun when you sort of have it all put in and then you can decide it needs a little bit of this or a little bit of that or whatever it is. And I think, you know, I end up painting it one way, then wiping it off, and then doing it a different way. There's a lot of back and forth. But when you have that back and forth, you end up getting interesting colors. Because there's always a little bit of it showing through even after you fix it. And then you're not just painting these monochromatic colors everywhere. So right on the horizon line, I'm trying to get a little bit of an effect, you know, that you see where you have that orange bleed right on the horizon. And it's definitely too strong, but I'll take it out. Try to leave a little bit of it in. And this is, I'm well aware that this is too strong as I put this in, but I know I'm going to use the scraper or, you know, whatever, come back and tone it down like I'm doing now. And I just picked up some pure purple and just mixed it into that. Now for the bright, very brightest bit. So So you play and you play and you play, and you hold off on putting in your lightest lights. And I always hold off, because it's real easy to come in at the end and put it in. But by not having all that bright white in the sky the whole time, it means it's that much less milk that's going to get into everything else. So it was a little bit brushy, a little bit non-distinct. And so here at the end, what I'm doing is I'm just going in and trying to put in a little bit of detail, or not necessarily detail, but just maybe taking out some of the brushiness and just toning it down a bit. And then I'm trying to put in some fine detail, just some little blades of grass, little flowers, sticking up or whatever. And some of it I like, and then I went too far and ended up doing it too much, and then had to kind of tone it down a little bit. But here I'm still, it's funny because now I look at it and it doesn't really bother me nearly as much as when I painted it. But I did tone it back down, as you can see. I kind of jumped forward here, but did leave some of the little bit of detail. So a few little crispy blacks, fixing a few lines here and there, and there's the finished painting. And the colors are different because this was taken with my camera and the color was balanced right, and I did it, instead of doing it with the video camera. But here it is. If you go to drawmixpaint.com, you can find links to all my free videos. If you go to genevafineart.com, you can find out all about the paint that I use to paint with, that I manufacture myself right here in Austin, Texas. And thank you so much for watching.